So what I was drawn to speak about today, and the morning and the afternoon will relate to each other. But this morning I wanted to just start with speaking about the experience of being everything and nothing at the same time. And different traditions, I think, can lean more towards one side or the other. And my experience is that it's an inseparable experience. And people can be afraid of either side of that, right? There can be the fear of annihilation when you feel the nothing side. And there can be a fear of power, or fear of being overwhelmed, or fear of being lost in the everything side. And there's any number of experienced fears on either side. So I wanted to address both sides of that, and ultimately speak to where they're the same. It's a simultaneous experience. So just to get a little read of the room here, how many people have had the experience of being afraid of the experience of everything? And how many people have had the experience of being afraid of nothing? How many people have had the experience of being everything? And how many people have had the experience of being nothing? And how many people have had the experience of them as simultaneous? So, great. People can relate to what I'm talking about. So, let me just be quiet for a minute. Sometimes it's tricky for me. I'm experiencing so many things at once. It's hard to get it into words to then put it in a linear form to articulate it. So last night I said everything is made up, or everything is created. And to even have an experience at all, there has to be a creation for an experience to happen. The experiencer is a creation. And so there's this, it makes sense why koans were created, because the mind can't actually get it. You can't articulate a paradox, a lived paradox. So we are a living paradox. Like, that's what we are. We are everything and nothing at the same time. And the mind can't quite make sense of that. The mind is part of creation and has its own function and form and expression. So there's a surrendering of familiar parts of yourself to open to the lived experience of being the paradox, of living that paradox. There is, or form is necessary for the experience. And in this experience of everything and nothing, experienced as a human being in a body, right? That's where we all are right now. There has to be a structure or a form that's related to having the experience. Form and function and being aren't separate from each other. It's one thing. I'm hearing voices of different people in my classes who've been with me for a long time, and they'll often say, if you don't understand what she's talking about, don't worry about it. Don't try to figure it out. And to just let yourself be saturated with what's being said, that the words are a frequency, the words are a vehicle for information that you already are. So like a C note tuning fork, if you have two tuning forks and you hit one, the other one is going to start to vibrate. So if your mind is thinking, what the heck did she just say? Don't worry about that. And there'll be time to ask questions too if there's a wanting to clarify, what I'm saying. So the reason that I'm speaking about this aspect of form, if I'm going to help point to that inseparability of everything and nothing, there's a felt experience in the body. And that felt experience is related to a form, to have that experience. So, resting as everything and nothing, there's an experience of profound groundedness. And this is where a lot of what I experience also is physics. And I don't have a physics background to explain it, so it's just an experiential articulation, right? So from nothing to form, there's gravity. There's a sense of concentration of this force that pulls consciousness into form, pulls consciousness into being. And so when I'm experiencing acutely the everything and nothing, there's an awareness of what I call the core flow of consciousness, or the pathway that Kundalini flows. I know there are different names and different traditions for what I'm talking about. And I will experience that both in a linear fashion, as an alignment through the dimensional bodies, through the different dimensions. I'll experience that axis, that center core, and all the dimensions at the same time. So I experience that linearness as my structure. So it has both a linear, singular kind of movement to it, as well as all the expansion of the dimensions that arise out of that. And so it'll be both as this linear experience, but it's also I don't know how to explain this so well. Did anyone read A Wrinkle in Time when you were a kid? Just a couple people. So,
what was the book?
A Wrinkle in Time. It's just a children's book. I'll do another example. So when I was learning shiatsu, one of the initial things we were taught was to feel the yin spot and the yang spot on a particular meridian, to have your thumb on each, and to soften and surrender into the union of them with your thumbs in different places. And there's an experience then of surrendering where there's no difference, and it actually balances out the meridian. It brings wholeness to where there was a sense of separation. And so this seeming vertical axis of consciousness is sort of like those 2 points. To have a line, there has to be an idea, a concept of the 2 points. But one can surrender where there's a single point. So resting as everything and nothing, I experience both that line of consciousness and where there is no line at all. There's just a single point of consciousness. And in the manifestation of being, there's this gravitational pull of consciousness into form that's both focal, like it's in this focal point that exists and also doesn't exist at the same time. I haven't spoken about this before, and I realize there's lots of details about what I'm saying, but I'm also wanting to help bring that in as an experience. And so it may be that the mind starts to follow some of this and then surrenders into the experience. So that everything is so multifaceted. And each aspect of everything has its own form and function and identity. And when your sense of identity of I am starts to soften and open up through the infinite I am, then you are everything. And everything can be experienced as self. But the distinctions still remain. You know, as I was saying last night, if everyone, we're all still going to be here in our individual bodies. And there's I kind of shift from delight and joy into amazement and being astounded, you know, just of what's actually happening, like this unbelievable creation that we all are. So if I come back to the nothing part, it's fairly consistent that when, let me maybe say this differently. Where there's fluidity of that sense of I am, then all of the information, all of the everything is accessible, is fluid. So like I was saying about being at the grocery store and, being with the consciousness of the carrots and hearing someone's thought process of what happened in their evening last night and feeling what was left over of the energy of the previous person holding the cart. There's a fluidity there. And if there isn't that easeful sense of fluidity through these expressions of everything, so far my experience is there's that perceiving point where you're experiencing from needs to surrender through nothing to then open up to a larger I am. Every time I pause and I'm quiet, there's a resting as nothing, completely surrendering everything. To rest is nothing. So then the next thing that wants to come out has the opportunity to. So the more comfortable you are at resting as nothing, there's a zillion endings of that sentence. I mean, that's where the freedom is. You're not caught in any one particular expression that then has to have a particular ending or a particular trajectory. It's almost like the universe is this game board, right? And you say, all right, I'm going to be the red piece, I'm going to be the blue piece, I'm going to be this character or that character, and then you go into it, and then there's all these possible pathways, and every time you surrender into nothing, you get to have a clean slate. So maybe you're at the point in the game board of like being at a door and there's a monster behind it and you don't want to like get your head lopped off, and it's like, what do I do? Just surrender. Just surrender the game board. You get to like get a different perspective. So our identity, loosening that sense of identity, starts to create that fluidity, and resting as nothing opens up infinite possibilities and infinite options. And it can definitely be disturbing to realize that you're nothing. Right? We're invested. We've entered the game board. We are alive. We have wants and desires and ideas of what would be a better way for things to go, or what would be a good way. There are I'm going to speak about another facet here, which is also related to why we can be afraid of everything and afraid of nothing when it's actually our innate nature. You know, it's like we're afraid of ourselves, basically. We're terrified of ourselves. I don't quite know how we got here. I keep seeing deeper and deeper layers of consciousness and why we're at this particular point in time with our consciousness as it is. But there's been a deep confusion or a deep misunderstanding about our nature. And everything that we want is actually what we already are. And in that sense of separation, it's natural to reach for what we think will bring us wholeness. Part of the trick is, though, that we're reaching in the wrong direction. We're reaching outside for what seems to be what will create that sense of wholeness, as opposed to surrendering back inside to where we already are what we're reaching for. And so one of the fears of surrendering into nothing is there's a fear that you aren't going to get that sense of wholeness, because one's trying to find that wholeness through reaching on the outside. So if I don't feel loved and then I'm reaching for a partner or a mother or father or sister or dog or whatever, the sun, the ocean, whatever, to feel that sense of love. Right? If I am in that game of duality where there's a opposition happening, a wanting, the sensation is, if I surrender into nothing, I'm going to have to let go of feeling wholeness, because I'm going to have to let go of what I've been desperately trying to reach to ultimately find myself, find wholeness. And so it's a misunderstanding about nothing. In the inseparability of nothing and everything, surrendering as nothing, that they're inseparable. So whether it happens in that moment of experiencing everything or happens later, it's inevitable. That resting is nothing, wholeness comes. In my kind of timeline experience, there was opening as everything, and in that everything, it was assumed that was it, and that's, you're everything, so what more could there be? So when a surrendering into nothing occurred, I was really surprised. But that's where the freedom is. Because you surrender being free of the game board. So everything gets reset to zero. So it seems useful to kind of name this to help yourself when when you're feeling the draw into nothing, to at least intellectually understand, oh, the sensation might be a fear of being annihilated. The sensation might be, oh, I'm not going to be whole. When that's what we're all reaching for, is a sense of wholeness. And we're only reaching for that because we're not resting as nothing. We're not resting as everything. So the compulsion has truth in it, right? To reach for love, to reach for kindness, to reach for generosity, to all these things we want. That movement has wisdom in it. It's just reaching in the wrong direction. But then that pathway going backwards, there's the experience of having to let go of those things you've been reaching for. And because we innately know that we are what we are reaching for, the pathway into nothing can elicit that fear of having to let go of what you are. And in that sense of separation, you're desperately reaching for that. So of course it's going to be terrifying to surrender into nothing. But the truth is, as nothing, you are everything. So you don't get to have what you are reaching for. Because in the having, there are two. There's the one who is having and the thing that is being had. So you do have to let go of having what you want, or having that sense of wholeness that seems to come from the wanting and the receiving. I'll often use like sugar or chocolate or ice cream or something, how like you can have a wanting and then you have it and then you feel satisfied, right? There's a sense of having had, being satisfied, but it's temporary. I know that one ice cream might not last you for 10 years of satisfaction of having had ice cream. It might, but it might not. So in that pathway in, falling back and through to nothing, instead of having, you actually become. So you then are love. You don't have love, you don't get love. You are love. So everything that we are seeking and wanting, we actually already are. And so there's a misunderstanding in the opening as everything and nothing. Yes, it can feel like you are letting go of what you deeply need and want, because it's what you are, and you know that. The sensory experience of being love, or being whatever it is you're seeking, is profoundly different than the sense of reaching and wanting and having and receiving. So another thing that is surrendered is that that feeling of reaching to have the satisfaction. And I'm repeating myself here, but that the mind can interpret that, surrendering that as, I'm letting go of love. I'm agreeing. In the surrendering, I'm agreeing that there's no love. I'm not going to do that. You know? But again, it's a misunderstanding. It's a misinterpretation of the truth. And one thing that's really useful, that's been really useful for me, is experiencing things as a sensation, because it helps free up the mind's interpretation of it. So the sensation of reach, oh, that's a sensation of reaching, you know, or whatever the experience is, to notice the sensation of it. And okay, that's just another sensation, it's another felt experience. So the sensation of dying, right? The sensation of annihilation. Oh, it's just another sensation. If the mind interprets it as I'm going to die, it kicks in the autonomic nervous system, it kicks in all sorts of past life memories of having died. I mean, it kicks in all sorts of things that the system can kind of start to contract. Whereas if there's an allowing of experience, and we don't like grip into it, we don't lean into it. I'm sure everyone has had the experience at some point of having something rising up, whether it was anger or someone's offering you an attitude and you're like about to like get in it with them and then you don't. Right? That's the sensation I'm talking about. Where you're like about to buy into that story and like get in it with somebody. You're on the game board and you're gonna play out your part. Right? That's a sensation of identifying and experiencing and contracting through and getting into something, which sometimes we want to do. I mean, that's what the whole life, that's what everything is the universe wanting to get into something. That's why we're all here. So it's not that there's anything wrong with that at all. That's kind of what I was referring to last night when I talked about having a nephew. I get into Auntie Kristin, right? That's who shows up. So it's not that there's anything wrong with that. But the freedom comes from recognizing that's what's happening. And when you know that's the game, you're not caught in it. I'm not caught in Auntie Kristin. I don't leave my sister's house holding on to Auntie Kristin. Auntie Kristin dissolves once this being walks out of the house. So when we're having this, if I go back to the example of, getting into an argument with somebody where you're about to like buy into it, right? There's the sensation of a more expanded sense of self coming into contracting into another experience to relate from a narrower viewpoint. And if you can start to feel that as a sensation, it's like a muscle that you can feel it contracting and then you can feel it letting go. And as you become aware of the contracting, at any point along that contraction, it may be that there's a awareness that allows that contraction to let go. So when someone's about to pull you into an argument and you feel yourself rising up into it, and then, I actually don't want to go there. That's what I'm talking about. And so feeling that sensation, that's a natural kind of focal point and opening of this aperture of awareness through manifestation, focusing in through something smaller or softening into something larger. So when you come up against the sense of, oh, I feel like I'm going to die, that's the same thing. There's a start, it's a rising up, oh, I'm going to die. If I fall into nothing, oh, I'm not gonna, whatever. It's the same thing. You know, it's like that contracting, and the more practiced you are at noticing the contraction and the softening, you can support the softening. Oh, it's actually okay to surrender into nothing. It's a sensation that I'm gonna die. And the truth is, we're living and dying every nanosecond. We're living and dying every nanosecond. And so coming into resting as everything and nothing at the same time, you are always dying. You are always dying, and you are always living at the same time. And identity becomes part of the game board. That's how all this play gets to happen. Singular consciousness makes all these identities to play, makes the game board, makes the environment, makes up the rules of physics in each of the dimensions, makes up the sense of identity to play with itself. So it's true, there can be multiple points in which there's a sense of dying. But I've died lots of times, and I'm still sitting on a chair right now talking. So it's partly our interpretation. That's our interpretation. You know, and it seems to me that for many lifetimes, if we things can be looked in a linear way or a simultaneous way, depends on what lens you're perceiving from. But if we look at it in the linear way, as a human race, we've been experiencing the sense of separation for a while. And there's all sorts of fears and stress and strategies of all different kinds to try and recreate the sense of wholeness that has never actually left, you know. So part of the whole process is surrendering through your instincts, right? It's like our instincts keep us alive. That's their job, right? To get towards the edge of a cliff and your body wants to back up, you know, or you fall and your hand goes out, or put your hand in a fire and you pull your hand out, right? There's instincts, and as we've become more dense as a race of being, this sense of physical survival has taken over, or it's not quite the right word, has become amplified in a way. And our emotional reality and our psychology has kind of started to reflect that physical nature of instinct. For example, if someone does something that hurts us emotionally, often the instinct is to retreat, as if the hand was in a fire and you pull the hand away. When sometimes it's useful to back up when there's something that's hurting emotionally, but often it's actually more useful to lean closer into the hurt. Someone says something, oh, that hurts. And then you stay present in the moment. So there's a level of kind of emotional abandonment that we offer ourselves, reflecting the physical nature of how to protect yourself from hurting. So then we protect those hurt places as opposed to bearing them wide open and saying, oh, when you said that, that really hurt. And it's not a blaming or a judging or anything external, it's just being with the truth. And that so it's like there's a whole rewiring or a re-educating or a remembering that's being called for here, where our instincts can lead us in the opposite direction of truth. So the instinct to reach out for love as opposed to surrendering into nothing. The instinct to protect an emotional experience as opposed to being present with it, having it rest open in the light of truth. There was a phase for me which lasted a few years. Someone had asked last night about intensity, and so this few years of experiencing, from the perspective of past lives, of experiencing all these different thoughts and painful experiences, and for them to resolve back to nothing, they needed to be felt, they needed to be seen, which means moving closer to hurt as opposed to moving away from hurt. And there was a profound willingness and a recognition that if everything is divine or everything is God, then everything is safe to be felt, even if that is horrifying. So there were multiple just layers of surrendering through all these kind of horrific experiences and remembering and feeling and meeting fully. It's like, God as an artist, as a creator, right? If you just keep creating and creating and things don't disappear, there's a lot of clutter. Right? And our experiences that we identify with are held on to and are held in form, and in a certain way are clutter, until they're fully experienced, fully felt, fully lived, and can resolve back into nothing. So part of what's happening is there is a density in our soul structure of all sorts of painful experiences that have happened that haven't been fully felt. And they're waiting to be fully felt, to die, to dissolve back into nothing. So when we recognize ourselves as everything and nothing, we are creation happening, and we are creation dissolving back into nothing at the same time. In this physical form, we've gotten so used to holding things, right? Holding a partner, holding onto your car, holding onto your favorite pair of shoes, right? This holding. And our nature is the creating and the dissolving. Our nature is everything and nothing at the same time. So when we identify with an experience and hold on to it, it can stay. And it's the beauty of the design. Right? Things want to be fully felt, fully learned, fully lived until they're done. So grief is an excellent example. Grief doesn't happen and then it's just gone. Grief kind of stays for a while. Grief is this process of coming into it's a process of coming into an acceptance or I don't even know what words to use. That's like the felt sense of being that does want time to integrate an experience. That works, integrate, right? Grief is part of the process of integrating something that's happened. And you can't make it be done. It's done when it's done. So everything wants its life, wants its experience, wants to exist, have its identity, have the experience until it's done. And we can hold on to it for a really long time. And part of what's terrifying is that there have been so many experiences that have happened that were so painful that there wasn't the capacity to fully feel them for them to integrate and be done. So when we start to enter the void or surrender into nothing, there's a lot that wants to then resolve and come into completion. And the felt sense of us that is in the holding knows it's going to have to feel all that stuff. But feeling it is the pathway through to its resolution. So there was an incredible, I often use the words this fierce willingness when I was in those few years of lying in my bed for 4 hours every morning, being with all the plunders of our world on all sides of victim and victimizer, what's the other? Perpetrator, thank you. And there was it just happened every single time if I fully stayed with the experience, with the expansiveness and the contraction at the same time. The expansiveness gave the contraction what was needed to resolve. Just like the thumb on the yin spot and the yang spot on the meridian. Resting as both, truth is there. So resting with the horror of atrocities that were experienced and felt, simultaneously resting as the expanse. It's the same thing as those fingers. And resolution can then occur. Everything and nothing are not separate. They're one. And fully experiencing what had been held onto and held in form was then able to resolve and let go and return to nothing. But it happens through the feeling, because the feeling is part of the educational component, as part of evolution. We all know the experience of understanding something intellectually, but it's not till we feel it that we can actually say we really understand. And so the lessons, the learning that comes through these experiences is the gem that comes after fully feeling something. Is this making sense? Yay! I mean, we're such just profoundly brilliant, magnificent creations. And it's just mind-blowing. And all that's happened is we've just gotten a little misinterpretation of what we are. And when we can start to understand more of the working parts and that nature of contraction, the nature of grasping, the instinct of fear of hurting, right? When we start to understand, oh, wait a minute, it's actually going to feel better if I feel that. If I feel how awful that is, if I feel how horrible that is, it will actually feel better. I'm not going to move away from it, I'm going to feel it. I'm gonna stay present with the situation that's happening current time and say something. I'm not gonna hide. Resting with the sensation and softening. Then we can have a little bit better support or understanding of how we're made and what's happening, to create the opportunity for shifting the paradigm that we've been believing about how to find wholeness. And then there's no doing. When the instincts start to change, right? The instinct of contracting and holding for safety, when it's understood that actually holding is where the pain is coming from. Then the instinct starts to change, where contracting starts to happen and the system goes, oh, I'm not going to contract, I'm not going to do that, because that's what hurts. I was going to speak about this next piece in the afternoon, but I'll just touch on it now. Maybe. Yeah, so and I just want to preface this with, like, I haven't studied anything. I don't really know how people use language, and I'm just talking about my experience and doing the best I can to try and articulate it. So, I keep just dissolving into the experience every time I try and use words. So there's this miraculous game of like two parts that aren't separate. So everything and nothing is two parts that aren't two parts, it's one. And masculine and feminine, I also experience as two parts that aren't actually separate, they're one. And I experience the emotional body and the mental body as two parts that aren't actually two, that are one. So we get to experience the distinction between them. When we're resting in a dualistic state, the mind and the emotion seem separate, and we can rest in a sense of let me say this differently. Part of the instinct of being in the physical form of that protecting. When we're in that duality, the mind and the emotions seem separate, and the mind is trying to protect. And we're not necessarily experiencing the present, we're not resting as the present moment in that union. So the mind can be strategizing, oh, I've seen this before, I'm not gonna, yada, yada, yada. It's based in the past, seeing something current, basing it on a past reflection, trying to protect oneself from a future possibility. So you got all these things going on, right? And so there is an intrinsic wisdom of trying to protect, navigating reality, right? So there is wisdom there. But it's a limited perspective. And what happens when we reference an old experience? We're usually referencing something that hasn't fully resolved and is held as form in the soul and becomes a lens. We see through that lens, and because we're creation itself, we have the capacity to create the current reality based on the limited view of that lens. So, example of being bitten by a dog. So then every dog, when that's held on to, every dog then can elicit a fear response. Maybe the dog that you're seeing hasn't bitten people before, but suddenly feels the massive field of fear of being bitten. The dog suddenly is terrified by this field of fear, and it needs to protect itself from the field of fear, and so it bites when it wasn't going to bite otherwise. Right? Like, it's amazing to me, just, walking through a grocery store, right? Or like, as people's thoughts, their cultural ideas of who they are and what they're protecting themselves against or what might happen. We're holding that in our field and projecting that reality out. which then other people don't necessarily recognize that's what's happening, but they pick up that information and respond in accordance to what that person is afraid they're going to call to themselves. So this creating our own reality, and it's not the will-based creating one's reality that it's not what I'm kind of referencing. I'm referencing where we hold on to these lenses, and because we're creation itself, we then create that. So that this cultural piece, I'll just speak to it because it's been really interesting to me as of late. I'll recognize, if I don't recognize the thought form in someone else, I'll recognize the response to it in myself and have a thought about someone. And then have another thought of, well, I don't actually really think that about that person. Like, that's weird. And then I'll recognize what happened. Yeah, so if someone has a thought of, oh, they don't like me, or people don't like me, right? The whole field of, ooh, you don't like me. So you walk past, like, ooh, I don't like them. Really? I don't know you from Adam. Oh, you don't think, oh, they don't think that I like them. Okay. Right. So, these are all the old structures that are wanting to fall away. And so much of who we think we are is a contraction. And how we relate to each other is through these contracted lenses. Is that a question there?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Could you repeat the question so that it's in the recording afterwards?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll just say, right, why did I know there was a question there? It was like a question just rose up right there in the, right? It's like, oh, yeah, what's your question?
So if I didn't have all those little contracted lenses here, I wouldn't know how to relate to anybody.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's resting is nothing.
Yeah.
And that's where the freedom is.
What was the question?
So he was saying, like, if he didn't have all those little contracted lenses, he wouldn't know how to relate to people. And
I mean, and so much of my time is spent within those lenses. I thought, it's like everybody.
right. Right.
Both positive and negative.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, you're saying both positive and negative. Right. Right. And then you were saying how much time you spend in those lenses, and through those lenses trying to strategize to navigate to get your needs met, or to not hurt other people, or to meet their needs. That's a contracted.
Whatever the rationale.
Right.
Whatever reason I make up, oh, I have to be nice to her. Oh, isn't he?
Right. So the resting is nothing is that 0 point free spot. And what I find when situations happen that I don't know what is going to come out of my mouth. And it's often surprising to both parties. So someone is in a moment of whatever, blaming or judging or making a twisted request or like something, out of alignment or in that contracted state. And as opposed to meeting it from another contracted lens, right? Nothing speaks and nothing says quite remarkable things that completely changes a situation. And it's not through thought, because the mind doesn't have access to that much brilliance. So surrendering is nothing. So this is great. This comes back to what I was wanting to speak about, that union of the masculine and feminine. I'll talk more about that in the afternoon, but the emotional body and the mental body being reflections of the masculine and feminine. And that in that union, we're resting as the present moment. We're not referencing, oh, I should say this, or I should respond that way. There's an authenticity that changes the situation because it's resting in the present moment. There's not a referencing of past traumas. There's not a protecting against future traumas. That when the system surrenders in the moment, everything is existing and not existing at the same time. So the hurt that is currently happening gets to live until it's done. But we're current with it. We don't abandon it. We don't save it for later. It's present. And then we stay steady with that. And so the mind and the emotions don't separate out in through this skewed sense of time, where then we create structures in the soul that need to be held and dealt with later. We're current. We're current in the appearance and current in the disappearance. And there's a level of, if there's a need of a sense of trust, then trust is present to stay steady with, if I stay steady with this, it will live and it will die. It will live and it will die. This is the nature, this is our nature. And then when the hurt is done, it's actually really done. It's not a tucked away wound that kind of festers and comes out later, well, you said da 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 da. It's actually done. So there's not a hurt. There's not a hurt that needs to be protected. Because we're resting as our nature of being and not being at the same time. And everything wants to live until it's done, and then it's gone. And so when we're not afraid of living and we're not afraid of dying, we're free to be both, as is our nature at the same time.